This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of April 4th, 2022. Well, my friends, I promised a return to topic for this week after my truly disastrous two-part series on the Oscars, which did not go the way that anybody expected. And so I'm back. And the subject for this week is why are phones so expensive? And, you know, I found that people really still ask this. And I would have thought, no, we'd all kind of get it by now. But yes, they still ask it. And I wanted to talk about why cell phones are perceived, at least, to be expensive and why they're really not, right? Why they are not incredibly expensive and they're just part of life today, and an important part, and a part that brings a lot of value despite the high price. First thing that I should point out is that I'm talking about premium phones. It is very, very easy to get a very good phone for $100, certainly under 200, by going the prepaid route. It's, you know, these phones are incredibly good considering the low price, and they would have just kind of kicked the butt of even a most premium phone 4 or 5 years ago. And they can be had for practically nothing. And I'm also not talking about used phones, which oftentimes refurbished phones with replacement batteries and even warranties can be found way down in that range if you want to go there. It's a wide and diverse marketplace. And that's the first thing that you really got to know is when you talk about expensive phones, you're really talking about getting the latest and greatest. You're talking about something that's been in development for about 3 years and is expected to have a service life of about 5 to 7 years out in the field because it will probably be sold and reused and sold and reused. But that there will be a new model out to supersede it in just under 1 year, usually. So these things have a really high cost of development in a very short time during which that money can be recouped. So you can't spread out the R&D costs on a very long manufacturing run, which is one of the reasons that the upfront price can be pretty high. I mean, yes, we're seeing phones now that are $1,500 phones. That's a far cry from the old days when you could get an iPhone brand new and actually own it for $199. But that's not really the whole story. Now, when you were paying $199 for that cell phone or less, you were getting it heavily subsidized because your carrier wanted to sell you on the idea of having one. I mean, and who needs to be sold on the idea of having a phone now? I mean, we don't even call them cell phones anymore. We just call them phones because it's all anybody has. So, you know, they subsidized and they made up for it by charging you a little bit extra in the service. And they, you know, did bulk buys and stuff like that. And that's what happened there. Now, if you were to have tried to buy, let's just say, for example, an iPhone 3G in 2008, completely unlocked, so you could take it to any carrier you wanted in the entire world, would have run you about $700 back then. Now, keep in mind, that's 14 years ago. And depending on how you want to measure inflation, because it's notoriously hard when you're talking about tech, that could be as much as $1,600, $1,700 today. And so when you look at it that way, a premium phone just doesn't cost you any more than it would have at that time if we weren't talking about carrier-locked phones. It's also very possible, by the way, to get the latest iPhone or Galaxy phone heavily subsidized, either on an installment plan where you end up paying nothing for it, or just flat out free if you sign a contract. These deals are still out there. And another bit to talk about, and we tend to lose sight of this, is just how amazing these little palm-sized computers are. I mean, everything that's crammed in to such a tiny space. And it doesn't seem like they've got great battery life because we all know they very rarely last more than a day. But for all of the massive amount of computing that they do in such a small space and the bright, clear display they've got, I mean, I'm not talking about going back to the 60s. I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm saying just go back to the 90s. You've got a device in the palm of your hand that is more powerful than a 1990s supercomputer with a display that beats any television you could have gotten at that time, and beats most graphic terminals at that time. And you're paying, for the most part, just around the low four figures for it. And if you look at it that way, it's just, we tend to think about our technology going down in price by these quantum levels over time, because that's the way most things have been over the last 50 years. But we tend to not notice how much more powerful they are and how much more capability they have. And you say, oh, well, I still use my phone for the same things I used it for before, except you don't. The apps require more power. The camera processing is just flat out amazing. The amount of neural processing that goes into turning out every single shot in your camera is just, it was beyond what was even capable of 10 years ago. And in anything. And it all happens silently, instantaneously, beyond anything that you could hope for. It's just something to think about when you look at it that way. It's, the phone's pretty amazing. The phone's pretty marvelous. So when you look at it that way, and you take a look at, there's still being budget phones out there that you can get at a really great price. The fact that you do have a phone with real resale value, which is another thing I haven't brought up, that the price isn't that much higher than it would have been for an unlocked phone 14 years ago, and that these things are just really flat out amazing when you think about it. Put that all together, and the truth of the matter is that they're just, there's nothing to the idea that these things are incredibly expensive now. And I'm going to leave you with one more thought, and this probably won't be a terribly long podcast because I have only one more thought. And that's, think about the value that you personally get out of your cell phone. Think about every way in which it connects you to everything you care about. Information, the people that you love, your work, that what it allows you to do is to actually get out of your house. I mean, we can talk about getting out of your house now for the first time in a couple of years for a lot of people. It allows you to do that and not miss anything, which is incredible. I mean, and it gives you so much value. It lets you do everything from order food and clothes and buy cars with it and play games and learn about the news of the day, be entertained, have access to literally every song that's ever been recorded, I think, and on and on and on. And this portal, this thing, which is a miracle of modern technology, will set you back, really only about 3% of the poverty level for a family of four. And if you talk about the average salary for a person, we're talking about, 1.5% to 2% of your salary per year for that hardware. That's not that bad. That's not that bad. But of course, every phone can be better, and next year's phones will be even better. They will have better reception. They will be faster. You can count on it. They will have the most astounding cameras in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in the meantime, if you need a phone, I will stick in a plug for Solid Signal. We are AT&T dealers, and just because you can leave the house doesn't necessarily mean you want to go to the mall or go to some standalone place to try to wait 20 minutes just to talk to a human. You probably know what kind of phone and kind of service that you want. Why not just call the experts at Solid Signal, 888-233-7563. That's 888-233-7563. You can get it all done with a phone call. You can even do it through chat if you go to solidsignal.com. And besides, these are really nice people. They pay for this podcast every single week so that I can be here to entertain, annoy, and astound you. So please give my friends at Solid Signal a chance if a new phone is in your future. That's about it for the Solid Signal podcast for this week. I have been Stuart, and I will be back next week with even more fun and games. Until then, like and subscribe, as I tend to say, makes me look good to my bosses, and I will catch you again in about a week.